There's a stretch of Interstate 80 in Pennsylvania where the road just seems to disappear into darkness. If you've ever driven through Clearfield County late at night, you probably know what I mean. Miles of forest, hardly any towns, just the hum of your tires and the occasional truck blasting past you in the opposite lane. I've driven that highway hundreds of times. It's part of my job. But there's one night I still think about almost every time I pass that stretch of road. Because that night, I picked up someone, a hitchhiker. He barely spoke during the entire ride, didn't tell me much about where he was going, and honestly, something about him felt off from the moment he got into my truck. But what really messed me up was what I saw a few hours later at a gas station. A faded poster taped beside the restroom door, a missing person poster with the exact same man's face staring back at me. And according to that poster, he had been missing for almost 8 years. Before we get into tonight's story, if you enjoy realistic horror stories and creepy, true-style encounters, make sure you subscribe for more stories every week. Now, let's get into it. My name's Matt. I'm 32 now, but this happened about 4 years ago when I was working as a regional delivery driver for a logistics company based in Pittsburgh. Most of my job involved overnight runs, packages, equipment, sometimes medical supplies, things that needed to move between cities quickly. The company had routes all across Pennsylvania and parts of Ohio, and because of the schedule, I was almost always driving between midnight and sunrise. If you've never driven long distances at night, it's a strange experience. During the day, highways feel alive. Cars everywhere, gas stations busy, people moving around. But at 3 in the morning, highways feel completely different. It's like the world is half asleep. The roads feel empty, the towns feel abandoned, and the stretches of highway between them feel even lonelier. One of my regular routes ran from Pittsburgh to Scranton, which meant crossing a huge chunk of the state using Interstate 80. That road cuts straight across northern Pennsylvania, and for long stretches, it's nothing but forests and mountains. There are towns here and there, but sometimes you can drive 30 or 40 minutes without seeing much of anything. That night started like any other run. It was early November, cold, the kind of cold where the air feels sharp when you breathe it in. I left Pittsburgh around 11:30 p.m., driving a white cargo van loaded with a few sealed containers that needed to reach a distribution center outside Scranton by morning. The drive was supposed to take about 4 hours. By the time I got onto I-80, traffic had already thinned out. Just a few semi-trucks scattered across the highway, most of them moving fast, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Around 1:45 a.m., I started feeling that familiar tiredness creeping in. Nothing dangerous yet, just that dull heaviness in your eyes after staring at the road too long. I decided to stop at the next gas station. There's a small one right off an exit near Clearfield County. It's one of those places that mostly caters to truck drivers, a small convenience store, a couple of pumps, and a dim parking lot surrounded by trees. When I pulled in, there were only 2 other vehicles there, a semi-truck parked near the far edge of the lot, and an older pickup truck sitting near the entrance. The store lights were bright compared to the darkness outside. Inside, it smelled like stale coffee and fried food. The cashier was a guy in his late 40s, watching something on a tiny TV behind the counter. He barely looked up when I walked in. I grabbed a bottle of water and a coffee. While I waited in line, I noticed something strange. The place was completely silent. No music, no talking, just the quiet hum of refrigerators along the wall. I paid for my stuff and stepped outside. That's when I noticed him. At first, I thought he was just another truck driver walking across the lot. But then I realized something. He wasn't heading toward a vehicle. He was walking toward the road. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, tall, thin, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His hair was messy, like he hadn't brushed it in a while. And the strange thing was, he didn't seem to be carrying anything. No bag, no backpack, nothing. He just walked slowly along the edge of the parking lot toward the exit. For a moment, I assumed maybe his car had broken down somewhere nearby, but something about the way he moved made me pause. He looked almost lost. Not drunk, not injured, just wandering. I got into my van and started the engine. As I pulled toward the exit, I saw him again. He was standing on the shoulder of the road just beyond the gas station lights. And that's when he raised his thumb. A hitchhiker. Now, normally, I would have just kept driving. Every driver hears the same advice growing up. Don't pick up strangers, especially not on empty highways at night. But something about the situation made me hesitate. Maybe it was the cold, maybe it was how empty the road was, or maybe it was just one of those decisions you make without thinking too much. I slowed the van, then pulled over a few feet ahead of him. He walked up to the passenger side door and leaned down slightly to look inside. His face was pale in the glow of my dashboard lights. Up close, he looked older than I first thought. Late 30s, maybe. His eyes looked tired. Not like someone who hadn't slept, more like someone who had been walking for a long time. "You headed east?" he asked. His voice was quiet, almost flat. "Yeah," I said. "Scranton direction." He nodded slowly. "That'll work." I hesitated for a second, then unlocked the passenger door. He climbed in and shut it gently. The moment the door closed, the van felt strangely quiet. I pulled back onto the highway. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the engine and the wind rushing past the vehicle. Eventually, I asked the obvious question. "So, where are you headed?" He stared out the window for a moment before answering. "There's an old diner a few miles up the road," he said. "I just need to get there." I frowned slightly. "A diner?" "Yeah." "That place open this late?" He didn't respond right away. Then he just said quietly, "It will be." Something about the way he said it made me glance over at him. His eyes were still fixed on the darkness outside. And for some reason, the temperature inside the van suddenly felt colder. For the first few minutes after he got into the van, neither of us said anything. That's actually pretty normal when you're driving long distances with someone you don't know. Sometimes people just sit quietly until conversation starts naturally. But this silence didn't feel normal. It felt heavy. The man sat stiff in the passenger seat, his hands resting flat on his knees. He wasn't slouching like most passengers do. He wasn't looking around the van or checking his phone. He was just staring straight ahead through the windshield, almost like he was watching something far beyond the reach of the headlights. Outside, Interstate 80 stretched endlessly through the forest, Tall trees lined both sides of the road, their branches forming dark shapes against the night sky. Every now and then, another truck passed in the opposite direction, blasting by with a roar of wind. Each time it happened, bright white headlights flooded the inside of the van for a split second. And every time that happened, I caught a clearer look at the hitchhiker's face. His skin looked pale. Not sickly pale, just drained, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. After about 5 minutes, I tried starting a conversation. "So," I said casually, keeping my eyes on the road, "you been walking long?" There was a pause. "A while," he said. His voice was quiet, flat, like there was no energy behind it. I nodded slightly. "That gas station back there the last place you stopped?" "Yeah." Another short answer. I waited a second, expecting him to say something else. He didn't. "So where you coming from?" I asked. This time he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly turned his head and looked at me. His eyes looked darker in the dashboard glow. Not threatening, just tired. Then he said something strange, further back than that. I frowned slightly. "Meaning?" But he had already turned his head back toward the window. That was the first moment I felt a small knot form in my stomach. The guy wasn't being rude exactly, but his answers didn't feel normal. They felt disconnected, like every question I asked was reaching him from very far away. After another minute of silence, he spoke again. "You drive this road often?" "Yeah," I said, "couple times a week." He nodded once. "Gets quiet out here." I laughed a little. That's the truth. But he didn't laugh. He just kept staring ahead. The highway curved gently through another stretch of forest. "You ever notice how different the road feels at night?" he asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" I said. "The highway," he said. He gestured slightly toward the windshield. "It's not the same road during the day." I thought about that for a moment. I guess not. He leaned his head back against the seat. During the day, people pass through it. At night, it feels like something else owns it. I glanced over at him. "What do you mean by that?" He shrugged faintly. "Just feels that way." Something about the way he said it made the air inside the van feel colder. I didn't say anything else after that. For the next 10 minutes we drove mostly in silence, but I kept noticing small things about him. He never once asked where I was going, never asked my name, never asked anything about me. Most hitchhikers try to make conversation. They're grateful for the ride. This guy didn't seem interested in conversation at all. It was like he was just waiting. Eventually, he spoke again. "Take the next exit." I looked up. Sure enough, an exit sign was coming up ahead. I slowed the van slightly. "What's out there?" I asked. "That diner I mentioned." The exit ramp curved down into darkness. No streetlights, just the van's headlights illuminating the road ahead. After a short drive off the highway, we reached a quiet 2-lane road. And then I saw it. About 100 yards ahead, sitting alone beside the road, was an old roadside diner. The building looked like it had been there for decades. Long metal siding, cracked windows, a flickering neon sign above the entrance. East Valley Diner. Only half the letters were glowing. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just one old car sitting near the far edge. I slowed and pulled the van into the lot. As my headlights swept across the diner, something immediately felt wrong. The place looked closed. No lights inside, no movement, just dark windows staring back at the parking lot. I parked near the front entrance and put the van in park. The hitchhiker reached for the door handle. "Thanks for the ride," he said quietly. "No problem," I replied. But before he opened the door, I asked something. "You sure this place is open?" He paused, then slowly turned his head toward the diner. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he answered softly, "It used to be." I frowned. "What do you mean?" But he had already opened the door. Cold air rushed into the van as he stepped outside. The door shut behind him with a dull thud. I watched him through the windshield as he walked slowly toward the diner. When he reached the entrance, he stopped, just stood there, perfectly still, not knocking, not trying the door, just standing. Then, after a few seconds, he slowly turned and looked directly at my van. And for some reason, that moment gave me a sudden urge to leave. For a few seconds, I just sat there in the van with the engine idling. The headlights were still pointed directly at the front of the diner, lighting up the cracked siding and the faded sign above the entrance. The hitchhiker stood near the door, completely still. Even from that distance, I could tell he was looking straight at me, not waving, not nodding, just staring. Something about it made the back of my neck feel tight. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just making sure I left before he tried the door. Maybe someone worked there and he was waiting for them to unlock it. Still, the place didn't look open. Every window was dark. No neon open sign. No lights inside. Nothing. After a moment, I shifted the van into drive. The headlights swept across the diner again as I began pulling away. The hitchhiker didn't move. He just kept standing there, watching. As I turned back toward the road, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The diner sat alone in the darkness behind me. The flickering neon sign buzzed faintly, and the man was still standing in the exact same spot. I turned onto the empty road and headed back toward the interstate. Within a minute, the diner disappeared behind a wall of trees. The highway ramp came up quickly. Soon I was back on Interstate 80, the van settling into a steady hum at around 65 miles an hour. For a while, I just focused on the road, but the strange feeling from earlier hadn't gone away. I kept replaying that last moment in my head, the way he stood there, the way he looked at the van, and especially the way he answered my question. It used to be. What did that even mean? I had driven this route plenty of times before. I didn't remember ever seeing that diner open, but I also never really paid attention to places like that. After about 15 minutes, the tension in my shoulders finally started to fade. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of dark asphalt through endless forest. A semi-truck passed me slowly on the left. The rumble of its engine filled the air before it disappeared into the night ahead. Eventually, the strange feeling faded into the background. Just another weird encounter on a long drive. Around 3:40 a.m., I saw signs for another exit coming up ahead. There was a larger gas station there that truck drivers often used. I decided to stop again, mostly to grab another coffee and stretch my legs. The exit ramp led down into a much brighter area than the diner. Streetlights illuminated the intersection. The gas station itself was bigger too. Multiple pumps, a convenience store that looked open, and a row of parked semi-trucks along the side of the lot. When I pulled in, the place looked a lot more alive than the previous stop. A couple truckers were standing near the entrance, talking. Another guy was filling his pickup truck with gas. I parked the van near the front and shut off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the ticking sound of the engine cooling. Outside, the wind pushed gently through the trees surrounding the lot. I grabbed my wallet and stepped out of the van. The cold air hit immediately. November nights in Pennsylvania can get pretty brutal. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. The place smelled like coffee, fried food, and gasoline. There were shelves of snacks lining the aisles and a small hot food counter near the back. Behind the register stood a woman who looked like she'd been working the overnight shift for years. She barely glanced up when I walked in. I grabbed another coffee and a small bag of chips. Then I headed toward the back hallway where the restrooms were. As I walked down the narrow hallway, I noticed something taped to the wall beside the restroom door. At first, I didn't think much of it. Gas stations always have flyers posted around. Local ads, lost pet notices, stuff like that. But as I got closer, the photo on the paper caught my eye. It was a missing person poster. The paper was slightly faded, like it had been there for a long time. Across the top, in bold black letters, were the words, "Missing Person." Beneath it was a photograph of a man. And the moment I looked at that face, I felt my stomach drop, because I recognized him immediately. It was the same man who had been sitting in the passenger seat of my van less than 2 hours earlier. The same pale face, the same tired eyes, the same messy hair. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the poster, trying to convince myself I was wrong. But I wasn't. It was him. And below the photograph were the words that made my chest tighten. David Holland, missing since October 2015. Underneath that was a short description. Last seen walking near Interstate 80 in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. I felt a sudden chill crawl up my spine, because the place where I had picked up that hitchhiker earlier was less than 20 miles from where this man had disappeared, and the face on that poster was the exact same man I had just given a ride. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at the poster. My brain was trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing about it felt right. The photo showed the exact same man who had been sitting in my passenger seat. Same face, same eyes, same messy hair. Even the dark jacket looked almost identical. I leaned closer to the paper, reading the text again just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood something. David Holland, age 34, missing since October 2015. Last seen walking near Interstate 80 in Clearfield County. My stomach tightened. That was almost 8 years ago, but the man I picked up tonight didn't look like someone who had aged 8 years. He looked exactly like the photo. Same face, same age. I stepped back slowly. "Everything okay?" The voice made me jump slightly. I turned and saw the gas station clerk standing near the end of the hallway. She was probably in her 50s, wearing a thick jacket over her uniform. "Yeah," I said quickly. Then I gestured toward the poster. "Hey, this missing guy." She glanced over. "Oh, that one. You know anything about it?" I asked. She shrugged slightly. "Not really. That poster's been up there a long time." "How long?" I said. She thought for a second. 5, maybe 6 years? That made the knot in my stomach tighten even more. "You remember the guy?" I asked. She walked over and looked at the poster more closely. "Vaguely," she said. "People talked about it when it first happened." "What happened exactly?" I asked. She leaned against the wall slightly. "From what I heard, he disappeared somewhere out along I-80. Like, just vanished?" "Pretty much," she said. "They found his car abandoned near one of the exits." I swallowed. "Which exit?" She pointed vaguely toward the highway. "Somewhere out near Clearfield County." My chest tightened. That was exactly where I had picked him up. "Did they ever find him?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nope." Then she added something that made my skin crawl. "Some truck drivers said they saw him walking along the highway that night." My heartbeat picked up. "Walking?" I said. "Yeah," she replied. "They said he looked lost or something." I stared at the poster again. The photo suddenly looked even more familiar now, because that's exactly how the hitchhiker had looked. Lost. Quiet. Like someone who had been walking for a very long time. The clerk noticed the way I was staring at the paper. "You okay?" she asked again. "Yeah," I said quickly. I forced a small laugh. "Just weird seeing stuff like that." She nodded. "Yeah, that stretch of highways had a few strange things happen over the years." That comment made me look up. "Like what?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Just stories." "What kind of stories?" I asked. She looked around the hallway briefly, then lowered her voice slightly. "People say they've seen someone walking out there late at night." My stomach dropped. "Walking where?" "Along the highway," she said. "Same area where that guy disappeared." I tried to keep my voice calm. "What do you mean people say they've seen him?" She shrugged again. "Just truck drivers talking. They say sometimes late at night you'll see someone walking near the shoulder." She tapped the missing poster lightly. "And they say he looks like this guy." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights above us buzzed quietly. I could hear the faint hum of refrigerators from the main store. My mind kept replaying the ride in the van, the quiet conversation, the strange answers, the way he had stared out into the darkness. Then something else hit me. "What about that diner?" I asked. She frowned slightly. "What diner?" "The one near that exit," I said. "East Valley Diner." Her expression changed immediately. "East Valley?" she said. "Yeah." She shook her head slowly. "That place hasn't been open in years." A cold wave moved through my chest. "How long?" I asked. "Since before I started working here," she said. "So at least 7 or 8 years?" My mouth suddenly felt dry, because that meant something impossible. The hitchhiker had asked me to drop him off there at a diner that had been closed for almost a decade. The clerk noticed my expression. "You all right?" she asked. I forced a quick nod. "Yeah." But my mind was racing now, because something about the timeline didn't add up. The man in the poster disappeared 8 years ago. The diner closed around the same time. And tonight, I had picked up a hitchhiker near that exact same stretch of highway. Someone who looked exactly like the man in the poster. My chest felt tight. I grabbed my coffee and walked back toward the front of the store. But before I left, I looked at the poster one more time. And something about it made my stomach twist even harder. Because the photograph looked recent. Too recent. The paper was faded, but the photograph itself looked like it had been printed yesterday. I walked out of the gas station feeling like the air had gotten colder. The parking lot lights buzzed softly above the pumps. A truck engine rumbled somewhere behind the building, but otherwise the place was quiet. Too quiet. I stood beside my van for a moment, staring at the dark highway entrance across the road. Part of me told myself to forget about it. Just finish the route, drop off the delivery in Scranton, go home and sleep. The whole hitchhiker thing could have been a coincidence. Maybe the missing poster just looked like him. People resemble each other all the time. That had to be it. But the more I thought about it, the less convincing that explanation felt. The face on that poster had been identical. And then there was the diner, the place that, according to the clerk, hadn't been open in almost a decade. Yet the hitchhiker had asked me to take him there like it was still operating. I stared down at the coffee cup in my hand. Steam drifted upward into the cold night air. A thought crept slowly into my mind. What if he was still there? The diner was only about 20 minutes back down the highway. If I drove there right now, I could check, see if the guy was actually inside, see if maybe someone had reopened the place recently. Or maybe I'd find him standing in the parking lot again. I don't know why the idea felt so important, but suddenly I couldn't shake it. I climbed back into the van. The engine started with a low rumble. For a moment I hesitated with my hands on the steering wheel. Then I turned the van around. Instead of heading east toward Scranton, I drove back toward the highway ramp leading west, back toward the diner. The road was almost completely empty now. Most of the trucks had moved on, just a few distant headlights appearing every now and then. As the van settled into speed on Interstate 80 again, I felt a strange tension building in my chest. Part of me felt ridiculous, driving back in the middle of the night just to check an abandoned diner. But another part of me felt like something about this night wasn't finished yet. The forest outside the highway seemed darker now. The trees formed thick walls of shadow on both sides of the road. The farther I drove, the more uneasy I felt. Eventually, the exit sign appeared ahead, the same one I had taken earlier. My hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as I slowed and took the ramp. The van rolled down the curved exit road, headlights sweeping across empty pavement. Everything looked exactly the same dark two-lane road, the same heavy silence. No cars, no movement. About a minute later, the diner came into view again. The flickering neon sign buzzed faintly in the darkness. East Valley Diner. The letters glowed weakly against the night. I slowed the van and pulled into the parking lot. The headlights washed across the front of the building. Cracked windows, peeling paint. The old car was still parked near the edge of the lot, exactly where it had been earlier. But something else immediately stood out. The hitchhiker was not there. The front entrance was empty. No one standing by the door. No movement anywhere in the lot. I parked in the same spot as before and turned off the engine. The silence felt heavy. Without the van running, the entire place felt strangely isolated. The wind moved softly through the trees behind the building. I stepped out of the van. The cold air hit me again immediately. For a moment, I just stood there listening. Nothing. No voices, no footsteps, just the faint buzzing of the broken neon sign. I walked slowly toward the diner entrance. As I got closer, the building looked even worse than I remembered. The windows were covered with a thin layer of dirt and dust. The door handle looked rusted, definitely not a place that had been opened recently. When I reached the door, I pulled my phone out and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness inside the diner. Dust covered everything. Tables were stacked in the corner. Chairs sat upside down. The entire place looked frozen in time, like no one had stepped inside for years. A chill moved slowly down my spine, because that meant something impossible. The hitchhiker hadn't come inside, and there was nowhere else for him to go. Then something caught my eye, near the edge of the parking lot, close to the trees. I turned the flashlight toward it. At first, I thought it was just a piece of trash, but as the light settled on it, my stomach tightened. It was a set of footprints in the thin layer of frost covering the ground. Fresh footprints, leading away from the diner and disappearing into the dark forest behind it. But the strange part wasn't where they went. It was where they started, because the first footprints didn't begin at the diner door. They started in the middle of the parking lot, right where my van had been parked earlier, as if someone had stepped out of my passenger seat and walked straight into the woods without ever touching the diner at all. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the footprints. The beam from my phone's flashlight trembled slightly in my hand as I followed the trail across the frosted parking lot. The prints were clear, a single set of boot marks pressed into the thin white layer covering the ground. They moved in a straight line toward the trees behind the diner. And just like I noticed before, they started in the middle of the lot, right where my van had been parked earlier. Not at the diner door, not near the road, directly beside where the passenger side of my van had been. I slowly turned and looked back at the vehicle. The passenger door was still closed. Everything looked normal. But the longer I stared at those footprints, the more a cold realization crept into my mind. The hitchhiker never went into the diner. He stepped out of my van, waited in the lot, and then walked straight into the forest. I looked back toward the dark tree line. The woods behind the diner were thick. Tall pines and bare branches tangled together, forming a wall of darkness just beyond the edge of the lot. The footprints disappeared into that darkness. Part of me wanted to get back in the van immediately and drive away, but another part of me felt pulled toward the trees. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the strange feeling that something about this night still didn't make sense. I moved slowly toward the forest. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I crossed the edge of the parking lot. The moment I stepped under the trees, the darkness felt heavier. The diner lights barely reached this far. My phone's flashlight was now the only real source of light. The footprints continued clearly in the dirt and frost beneath the trees. Step, step, step. Each one spaced evenly apart, like someone walking calmly into the woods. I followed them for about 20 yards, then 30. The sounds of the highway faded behind me. The forest became eerily quiet. No wind, no animals, nothing, just the faint crunch of leaves under my boots. Then the footprints stopped, completely. The last mark ended near a small clearing between the trees. I shined my flashlight around the area. Empty. No one standing there, no movement, no sound. The footprints just ended, like whoever made them had simply vanished. A sudden chill crawled down my spine, because there was something else strange about the clearing. Something lying on the ground, half buried under leaves. I stepped closer, and when the flashlight beam hit it fully, my stomach dropped. It was a wallet, an old brown leather wallet. I crouched down slowly and picked it up. The leather felt stiff and worn. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was a driver's license. The photo on the card made my chest tighten immediately, because it was the same face, the hitchhiker. The name printed beside the photo read, David Holland. My hands felt cold as I stared at the license. The expiration date said 2016, almost 8 years ago. The same time period the man on the missing poster had disappeared. I looked around the clearing again. The forest was completely still. Then something else hit me. If this was David Holland's wallet, and it had been lying here all this time, then the man I picked up tonight couldn't possibly have been him. My chest tightened. A cold wave moved slowly up my spine, because suddenly I remembered something else, something I hadn't noticed until now. During the entire ride, I had never once seen the hitchhiker's reflection. Not in the window, not in the side mirror, not even in the glossy surface of the dashboard. At the time, I hadn't thought about it, but now, standing alone in the dark woods with his wallet in my hand, that detail felt impossible to ignore. The wind suddenly moved through the trees above me. Branches creaked softly, and somewhere deeper in the forest, I heard something. Footsteps, slow, steady, crunching through leaves, moving closer. I froze. The sound stopped. The forest went silent again. I slowly turned the flashlight toward the darkness between the trees. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then the beam caught something, a shape standing about 20 feet away between the trees. Tall, still, watching me. The same pale face, the same tired eyes. David Holland. Exactly the way he had looked sitting in my passenger seat. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he slowly raised one hand, not waving, just lifting it slightly, like he had done when he first asked for a ride. My chest tightened with fear. I took a step backward, then another. The flashlight shook as I backed toward the parking lot. When I reached the edge of the trees, I turned and ran. Gravel crunched loudly as I sprinted back to the van. I jumped inside, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. The headlights blasted across the diner again. For a moment, I glanced toward the trees. Nothing there, just darkness. But as I backed out of the lot, something in the side mirror caught my eye. A figure standing near the forest edge, watching the van leave. I didn't stop driving until I reached the highway again. And even then, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone standing in the road behind me. I finished the delivery that morning, but I never told anyone about what happened that night. Not the police, not my coworkers, no one. But every time I drive through that stretch of Interstate 80 in Clearfield County, I still slow down when I pass that exit. And sometimes, late at night, if the highway is empty enough, I swear I see someone walking along the shoulder of the road. A tall man in a dark jacket, thumb raised, waiting for another ride.